Have you ever wondered why, no matter how much you grow, how much you heal, or how much you try to become stronger, there can still be a quiet voice inside you asking, "Am I enough?" Perhaps you have spent years trying to answer that question. You may have tried to answer it through the approval of other people, through relationships, through being needed, through being understood, or simply through becoming the person you thought you were supposed to be. And yet, when the room becomes quiet and there is no one left to impress, convince, or please, that question sometimes returns. Maybe the exhaustion you feel is not coming from life itself. Maybe it comes from carrying the invisible responsibility of proving that you deserve to be here exactly as you are. There is a strange way the mind learns to turn life into an examination. Someone rejects you, and you begin wondering what is wrong with you. Someone misunderstands you, and you feel an urgent need to explain yourself. Someone seems to be moving through life more easily than you are, and suddenly your own path appears inadequate. You look at where you thought you would be by now, and instead of seeing the human being who has survived, learned, loved, lost, and continued forward, you see a list of things that have not yet happened. And without realizing it, you begin living as though your worth is waiting somewhere in the future. But what if it isn't? What if the part of you that is trying so desperately to become worthy is not your deepest self at all? What if it is simply a frightened identity you learn to carry? An identity formed from old judgments, disappointments, expectations, and moments when you were made to believe that love had to be earned. There is something within you that existed before all those judgments arrived, before anyone told you what you should become, before comparison entered your mind, before you learned to measure yourself against the lives of others. There was a quiet awareness simply experiencing life. It did not ask whether it deserved the sunlight. It did not wonder whether it was important enough to breathe. It simply was. Perhaps spiritual growth is less about creating a better version of yourself and more about returning to that place. Imagine standing beside a river. The river does not stop at every bend to question whether it is flowing correctly. It does not compare its speed with another river. It does not apologize when its path changes around a stone. It simply moves according to its nature, trusting that every turn is part of its journey towards something larger than itself. And yet we often resist our own lives in ways a river never would. We say, "I should be further along." We say, "I should have known better." We say, "If I had made a different choice, perhaps everything would be different now." And sometimes we carry those sentences for years. They become so familiar that we no longer recognize them as thoughts. We begin treating them as truth. Awareness begins when you notice that voice without becoming that voice. You may hear the thought, "I have disappointed myself," and gently ask, who is the self that is disappointed, and who is the one noticing the disappointment? That small space between the thought and the awareness of the thought can become the beginning of freedom. Because you are not every judgment that passes through your mind. You are the awareness capable of seeing the judgment. And perhaps this is where proving yourself to yourself takes on an entirely different meaning. It is not about becoming so strong that nobody can hurt you. It is not about accomplishing enough that your doubts finally disappear. It is not about showing the people who underestimated you that they were wrong. Those desires are understandable, especially when you have been hurt, but they can quietly keep you connected to the very people and experiences you are trying to leave behind. If your life becomes a demonstration for those who doubted you, then their doubt is still directing your life. There may be another way. You can begin turning inward, not to judge yourself more carefully, but to meet yourself more honestly. You can notice where you have been seeking permission. You can notice where fear has been making decisions for you. You can notice how often you explain yourself because silence feels too vulnerable. And you can simply observe these patterns without condemning them. A tree does not become healthier because you shout at its damaged branches. You care for the soil. You give it light. You allow time to do what time knows how to do. Your inner life may need the same tenderness. Perhaps there was a time when pleasing others protected you from rejection. Perhaps staying silent kept a relationship peaceful. Perhaps doubting yourself seemed safer than risking disappointment. The person you once were was doing the best they could with the awareness available to them at that moment. You do not have to hate an earlier version of yourself in order to outgrow it. You can thank that version of yourself and gently release what is no longer needed. And this is where forgiveness begins to enter the conversation. Not yet as something you must offer everyone who hurt you, but as a willingness to stop using your past as evidence against yourself. You made choices. You misunderstood things. You trusted people. You stayed too long somewhere. You left too soon somewhere else. You may have ignored the quiet voice within you, but none of those moments removed the presence of the source within you. Clouds can cover the sky, but they cannot damage the sky. In the same way, fear may cover your awareness, regret may cover it, shame may cover it, the opinions of others may cover it for years. Yet beneath all of these passing experiences is something untouched, something that does not need to be repaired because it was never truly broken. You may simply have forgotten it was there. And perhaps that is why you are here now. Not to learn how to become worthy, but to remember that worth was never the question. Not to build an identity powerful enough to defeat your past, but to discover the awareness within you that is larger than your past. Not to prove that you can control everything that comes next, but to become peaceful enough to walk into uncertainty without abandoning yourself. There will still be questions. There will still be difficult days. There will still be moments when old doubts return and ask you to become the person you used to be. But now you can begin meeting those moments differently. You can become curious instead of afraid. You can ask, what am I trying to prove right now and to whom? Then become quiet enough to hear what remains when the need for an answer disappears. Because somewhere beneath the noise, beneath the comparisons, beneath the old stories and all the identities you have collected, there is a presence within you that has never asked you to prove anything. And as we move deeper into this journey, you may begin to see something surprising. The greatest obstacle to trusting yourself may not be weakness, failure, or uncertainty. It may be the part of the mind that has convinced you that you must become someone else before you are allowed to be at peace. What happens when you finally stop believing it? The moment you begin questioning the belief that you must become someone else before you can be at peace, something subtle changes within you. You may still hear the old voice. You may still feel the familiar pressure to explain yourself, defend yourself, compare yourself, or control what happens next. But now there is a little space around it. And in that space, you begin to recognize something important. Not every voice inside you is the voice of your deepest self. Some voices were learned. Some were inherited from people who were afraid for you. Some were shaped by disappointment. Some grew from moments when you felt rejected or unseen. Some came from a culture that taught you to measure your life against somebody else's life. And over time, these voices became so familiar that you began calling them me. This is one of the quiet workings of the ego. The ego does not have to be understood as something bad within you. Perhaps it is more helpful to see it as the part of the mind that tries to create an identity out of everything that happens. It collects names, roles, memories, achievements, failures, wounds, opinions, and expectations, then places them together and says, this is who you are. And because that identity feels fragile, it must constantly be protected. Someone disagrees with you, and you feel threatened. Someone does not appreciate you, and you feel diminished. Someone succeeds where you have struggled. And suddenly their happiness feels like evidence of your inadequacy. Someone walks away from you, and instead of simply experiencing the sadness of losing them, the mind asks, what does their leaving say about me? This is how suffering becomes heavier than the event itself. There is the experience, and then there is the story the ego creates about the experience. A relationship ends. That is painful. But then the mind says, I am impossible to love. Someone criticizes you. That may hurt. But then the mind says, maybe I will never be good enough. A plan changes unexpectedly. That may be disappointing. But then the mind says, nothing ever works out for me. The first pain belongs to the moment. The second pain often belongs to the story. And awareness gives you the possibility of separating the two. Imagine that you are looking at the sky during a storm. Dark clouds move across it. Thunder appears. Rain falls. If you had never seen the sky before, you might believe that the darkness was the sky itself. But you know that behind the clouds there is still an enormous openness that the storm cannot permanently change. Your thoughts can be like those clouds. Fear arrives, but you are not fear. Jealousy arrives, but you are not jealousy. Anger arrives, but you are not anger. Even self-doubt can pass through your awareness without becoming your identity. The problem begins when you hold on to the cloud and forget the sky. Perhaps you have done this with something someone said about you years ago. A parent may have questioned your choices. A partner may have made you feel inadequate. A teacher may have dismissed something important to you. A friend may have betrayed your trust. And even though the moment ended long ago, a sentence from that moment may still be living inside you. You may even have spent years trying to prove that sentence wrong. But notice the strange burden in that if someone once told you that you would never be enough, and you spend your entire life trying to prove that you are enough, then that old judgment is still controlling your direction. Freedom is not finally winning the argument. Freedom is realizing that you no longer need to participate in it. This can feel unfamiliar because the ego loves arguments, especially imaginary ones. It can rehearse conversations that never happened. It can revisit moments from 10 years ago and create better responses. It can imagine what other people are thinking and then defend itself against those imagined thoughts. You may be lying in bed in a perfectly quiet room while your mind is fighting a battle with someone who is not even there. And the body responds as though the battle is real. Your heart becomes restless. Your muscles tighten. Sleep moves further away. You begin preparing for a future conversation that may never happen. What would happen if, in that moment, instead of trying to win the argument inside your head, you simply noticed it? You might quietly say, "There is the need to be understood," not, "I should not feel this way," not, "Why am I still like this?" Simply, there is the need to be understood. That small shift is awareness. And awareness does not fight the ego, it illuminates it. When you bring light into a dark room, you do not have to argue with the darkness. You simply see what was previously hidden. You begin noticing how much of your suffering comes from attachment. Attachment to how another person should behave. Attachment to how your life should look by now. Attachment to the way your children should understand you. Attachment to the way your partner should love you. Attachment to the person you thought you would become. Attachment quietly says, "I can be peaceful, but first reality must cooperate with my expectations." And reality rarely signs that agreement. People change, bodies age, relationships evolve. Children grow and choose their own directions. Careers shift, plans disappear. People we love eventually leave this physical life. Seasons change, whether we are ready for them or not. A tree in autumn does not argue with the falling leaves. There is wisdom in that image. The tree does not interpret the loss of its leaves as personal failure. It does not desperately glue yesterday's leaves back onto its branches. It releases, because release belongs to the rhythm of life. Perhaps some of your suffering comes from trying to hold on to a season that has already ended. Maybe you are holding on to a relationship as it once was. Maybe you are holding on to an identity you have outgrown. Maybe you are holding on to the person you were before something painful happened. Or perhaps you are holding on to the belief that life owes you the future you once imagined. Letting go does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop demanding that what has changed must become what it used to be before you allow yourself to live again. And underneath attachment, there is often fear. Fear asks for certainty. It wants guarantees before you trust. It wants to know what will happen before you move forward. It wants to know whether someone will stay before you love them fully. It wants proof that everything will work out before it allows you to relax. But life rarely offers this kind of certainty. You can plan carefully and still encounter the unexpected. You can love deeply and still experience loss. You can make thoughtful choices and still discover that another path is calling you. Perhaps peace is not created by knowing what happens next. Perhaps peace grows when you stop requiring the future to explain itself before you trust your ability to meet it. Think about how much energy is spent trying to control tomorrow. You replay possibilities. You imagine outcomes. You prepare yourself emotionally for things that have not happened. The mind tells you this is protection, but sometimes it is simply suffering in advance. And there may be another way to live. You can still make thoughtful choices. You can still care for your responsibilities. You can still prepare. But somewhere beneath those practical actions, you can allow a deeper trust to exist. You can say, "I do not know what comes next, but I do not need to abandon myself because I do not know." That is a very different kind of strength. It is not the strength of control. It is the strength of presence. And presence becomes especially important when comparison enters your life. You may open your phone for only a few minutes and suddenly find yourself looking through windows into dozens of other lives. Someone appears happier. Someone appears more loved. Someone appears more certain about their purpose. Someone seems to have discovered something you are still searching for. The mind begins measuring their life against your life, their chapter against your chapter, their visible moment against your private struggle. And before you realize what happened, you have left yourself Comparison is one of the easiest ways to become a stranger to your own life. A rose does not look at an oak tree and conclude that it has failed because it cannot grow as tall. The ocean does not envy the mountain because it cannot rise into the sky. Each expression of life participates in the whole by being what it is. Could the same possibility exist for you? What if your task is not to become comparable? What if your task is simply to become available to the life that is moving through you? This does not mean you never learn from another person. Inspiration can be beautiful, but inspiration says, their light reminds me of my own. Comparison says, their light proves that mine is insufficient. One expands you, the other contracts you, and you can begin noticing which one you are choosing. There may also be moments when comparison takes a more painful form. Perhaps you see someone who once hurt you moving forward happily. You wonder why they seem peaceful while you are still healing from what happened. The ego may whisper, this is unfair, and perhaps it is understandable to feel that way. But your healing does not require their suffering. Your peace does not need their punishment. This is where forgiveness begins to reveal its deeper purpose. Forgiveness is not primarily something you do for another person. It is something that gradually releases your own heart from having to carry the event forever. Imagine holding a hot stone because someone else placed it in your hand. At first, the pain belongs to what they did, but eventually, there comes a moment when you notice that you are still holding the stone. You may not be ready to release it immediately. That is all right. Spiritual growth does not need to become another way of judging yourself. You can simply begin by noticing what you are carrying. Maybe resentment has become part of your identity. Maybe being wronged has become part of the story you tell yourself about who you are. And perhaps releasing that story feels frightening because you wonder who you will be without it. This is another subtle movement of the ego. It can become attached even to pain. Not because you consciously want to suffer, but because familiar pain can sometimes feel safer than unfamiliar freedom. You know who you are when you are the rejected one, the overlooked one, the person who was betrayed, the person who had to be strong. But who are you when those identities begin to loosen? Who are you when you no longer need your wounds to explain yourself? This question brings you closer to your true self. And it may also reveal why people-pleasing can become such a powerful pattern. Perhaps you learned that harmony meant keeping everyone else comfortable. You learned to say yes while something inside you whispered no. You learned to hide your disappointment so another person would not become upset. You learned to adjust your personality depending on the room. Eventually, you may become very skilled at understanding everyone except yourself. You know what everyone needs from you, but you no longer know what your own inner being is asking for. Then resentment begins quietly growing. Not because you are unloving, but because somewhere inside you, you know that you have been disappearing in order to be accepted. Real love does not require your disappearance. And saying no does not always mean you are rejecting another person. Sometimes it means you are finally listening to the quiet truth within yourself. You can be compassionate without abandoning yourself. You can be loving without becoming responsible for everybody's emotions. You can allow someone to misunderstand you without spending the rest of the day constructing a defense. There is enormous freedom in allowing other people to have their opinions. Their opinion belongs to their consciousness. Your peace belongs to yours. This does not mean becoming cold or indifferent. In fact, when you stop needing everyone to approve of you, you may become capable of loving them more freely. You are no longer secretly asking them to provide something your soul was meant to discover within. You stop saying, "Love me so I can feel whole." You begin saying, "Because I am learning to live from wholeness, I can love without making you responsible for my identity." That changes relationships. It changes the energy you bring into a room. And perhaps most importantly, it changes the relationship you have with yourself. You begin seeing that awareness is not a destination you reach once and permanently maintain. You may feel deeply peaceful today and wake tomorrow with an old fear. Nothing has gone wrong. The ocean has waves, but it remains the ocean. Your spiritual life may move in the same way. There will be moments of clarity and moments of confusion. There will be days when you trust the flow of life and days when you desperately want control again. There will be moments when forgiveness feels natural and moments when an old memory suddenly hurts. The invitation is not to become perfectly peaceful. It is to remember where peace lives. Instead of asking, "Why am I feeling this again?" you can ask, "Can I be present with this without turning it into who I am?" And perhaps you will notice something beautiful. The moment you stop fighting your fear, fear begins losing some of its authority. The moment you stop arguing with your sadness, sadness becomes something you can hold gently. The moment you stop demanding that uncertainty disappear, you discover that you can breathe even while uncertainty remains. This is acceptance, and acceptance is not resignation. It is the willingness to meet this moment before demanding another one. You are here. This breath is here. This moment is here. And somewhere beneath all the mental noise, the source is still here. Perhaps you have been looking for evidence that you are becoming spiritually stronger, but the evidence may be much quieter than you imagined. Maybe it is the moment you choose not to defend yourself. Maybe it is the evening when you notice an anxious thought and do not follow it into tomorrow. Maybe it is the conversation where you listen without preparing your response. Maybe it is the day you see someone else's happiness and allow it to remind you that life contains abundance rather than scarcity. Maybe it is the morning you remember someone who hurt you and feel, for the first time, that you no longer need them to understand what they did before you are allowed to heal. These are not victories over life. They are moments of alignment with life. And this brings us back to the question of proving yourself. What are you really trying to prove? That you are lovable? Love is already part of your nature. That you are worthy? Worth is not a prize handed to you after sufficient suffering. That you are strong? Perhaps your deepest strength is not your ability to resist life, but your willingness to remain open to it. That you matter? Perhaps existence itself has already answered that question by allowing you to be here, breathing this breath, experiencing this mysterious moment of consciousness. You may not need another person's permission to exist as yourself. You may not even need your own ego's permission. There is something deeper than the ego within you. Call it awareness, call it spirit, call it the divine presence, call it the source. The name matters less than the experience of becoming quiet enough to sense it. It does not shout. It does not compare. It does not keep score. It does not remind you of every mistake you have made. It simply waits beneath the noise. Like the bottom of the ocean beneath the restless waves, it remains still even when the surface is disturbed. And perhaps your work is not to calm every wave. Perhaps your invitation is to remember the depth. You can let thoughts come and go. You can allow uncertainty to exist. You can let other people think what they think. You can watch the ego reach for control without giving it the steering wheel. Then something begins changing. You stop asking life to prove that you are safe. You begin discovering the place within you that can remain present even when life is uncertain. You stop asking other people to prove that you are lovable. You begin discovering the love that was waiting beneath your fear. You stop asking achievement to prove that you are worthy. You begin recognizing that worth existed before anything was accomplished. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the question changes. Instead of asking, how can I prove myself? You begin asking, what would remain if I stopped trying? Perhaps there would be silence at first. Perhaps even emptiness. But stay there gently, because beneath that emptiness, something else may begin appearing. A quiet presence, a softness, a recognition that feels strangely familiar. And this is where the journey begins, turning toward home. Because once you see how fear, comparison, control, attachment, and approval have been shaping the identity you call yourself, another question naturally arises. If I am not all these fears, if I am not the judgments of others, if I am not my mistakes, my roles, my wounds, or the endless voice trying to prove my worth, then who am I? The mind may rush to answer. But perhaps this is one question that does not need an immediate answer. Perhaps it needs silence, because the true self is not another identity you must construct. It is something you begin to recognize when everything false grows quiet. And as we move deeper, the invitation is no longer simply to see the ego. It is to return to what has always been underneath it, to forgive what taught you to doubt yourself, to release what you were never meant to carry forever, to trust life without demanding guarantees, and to rediscover a love within you that does not have to be earned. That return may be the most important journey you ever make, even though you never have to travel anywhere to begin it. Returning to your true self does not require you to travel anywhere. It does not require you to discover some hidden version of yourself waiting at the end of a difficult spiritual journey. It may be much simpler than that. Perhaps returning means becoming quiet enough to recognize what has always been present beneath the fear, beneath the roles, beneath the old stories you have repeated for so long that they began to sound like your own voice. There is a difference between improving yourself and remembering yourself. Improvement often begins with the assumption that something is missing. Remembering begins with the possibility that what you are seeking has never truly left you. Think of the sun behind a cloudy sky. When the clouds become heavy, you may look upward and say that the sun has disappeared. But the sun has not gone anywhere. The conditions between you and the sun have simply changed. In the same way, there may be moments when love seems absent from your life, when peace feels distant, when purpose becomes unclear, and when you feel disconnected from everything you once trusted. Yet perhaps the source has not moved away from you. Perhaps your awareness has simply become crowded with fear, judgment, regret, and resistance. You do not need to fight the clouds. You allow them to move. And one of the deepest clouds we carry is the past. The past can become such a powerful identity because the mind returns to it again and again. You remember what someone said. You remember what you should have said. You remember the moment you trusted someone who disappointed you. You remember the opportunity you did not take. You remember the person you were before something changed. The event happened once, but memory can make it happen 1,000 times. This is why forgiveness can become such a profound doorway into freedom. Forgiveness does not ask you to pretend that nothing happened. It does not ask you to call cruelty kindness or betrayal love. It does not require you to return to relationships that diminish you. Forgiveness can simply mean that you are no longer willing to let yesterday determine the quality of your inner life today. Perhaps someone hurt you deeply. For years, you may have imagined that peace would come when they apologized. You thought healing would begin when they finally understood what they had done. You waited for recognition, remorse, or justice. And perhaps none of it came. So the mind concluded that you could not be free. But what if your freedom does not require their participation? What if forgiveness is the moment you stop handing another person the key to your inner peace? You may never receive the explanation you wanted. You may never hear the words you deserve to hear. Some people may leave this life without understanding the pain they caused. And still, your heart can become free. Not because the past has changed, but because your relationship with the past has changed. Imagine carrying a suitcase everywhere you go. At first, you remember exactly why you packed each item. There is the betrayal. There is the rejection. There is the humiliation. There is the regret. There is the conversation you cannot forget. There is the apology you never received. Years pass, and the suitcase becomes so familiar that you stop noticing its weight. You simply assume this is what traveling through life feels like. Then one day, perhaps in a moment of stillness, you place the suitcase down, and you realize how tired you have been. Forgiveness is sometimes that simple and that difficult. It is setting down what you have become accustomed to carrying. You do not have to throw everything away in one dramatic moment. You can begin with willingness. You can say, I am willing to stop carrying this forever. That willingness creates an opening. And perhaps the person you most need to forgive is yourself. There may be things you still hold against yourself that you would never hold against someone you love. You remember the relationship you stayed in, the warning you ignored, the time you were afraid to speak, the years you spent trying to please everyone, the decision you wish you could undo. You look backward with the awareness you have today and judge the person you were then for not knowing what you know now. But is that fair? A seed cannot be criticized for not yet being a tree. The person you were then had only the consciousness available to them at that moment. They were navigating life through whatever fears, beliefs, needs, and wounds they carried. Maybe they were trying to be loved. Maybe they were afraid of being alone. Maybe they did not yet know that saying no could be an act of self-respect. Maybe they confused being needed with being loved. Maybe they were simply doing the best they knew how to do. Could you look at that earlier version of yourself with compassion instead of accusation? Could you say, I understand why you were afraid? There is healing in those words. Not because they erase responsibility, but because responsibility without compassion easily becomes punishment, and punishment rarely brings you closer to your true self. Awareness allows you to learn without condemning yourself. You can acknowledge, I would choose differently today, and allow that realization to be evidence of growth rather than evidence that you once failed. Then the past becomes a teacher instead of a prison. And once you stop fighting the past, you may notice another place where tremendous energy has been spent, resisting the present. Perhaps something in your life right now is not what you wanted. A relationship has changed. Your body is aging. Someone you love is struggling. You do not know what direction to take. A door you expected to open remains closed. Something you carefully planned has fallen apart. The ego looks at this moment and says, This should not be happening. And immediately, the pain becomes heavier. Acceptance offers another possibility. Acceptance does not mean you prefer what is happening. It does not mean you become passive. It simply means you stop arguing with the fact that this moment has already arrived. You cannot change this moment by refusing to accept its existence, but you can change the consciousness you bring to it. Imagine being caught in a river current. If you panic and fight against the entire force of the water, you quickly become exhausted. But if you stop fighting long enough to understand the current, you may discover where it is carrying you and where movement is possible. Life has currents, too. Sometimes a relationship ending redirects you toward a deeper relationship with yourself. Sometimes uncertainty makes room for a purpose you could not have planned. Sometimes loss opens a tenderness in you that comfort never could. You do not have to call every painful event a blessing. Some experiences simply hurt, but perhaps you can leave a little space around the pain and say, I do not yet know what this moment is asking me to understand. The words "not yet" can contain enormous peace. They allow mystery to remain mystery. You do not have to understand everything while you are living through it. A seed beneath the soil cannot see the garden it is becoming part of. There are seasons when your life may feel like darkness rather than growth. Nothing seems to be happening. Old identities are falling away, but the new direction has not yet appeared. The ego becomes impatient. It asks for proof. Show me that this will work out. Show me that I am on the right path. Show me that I have not wasted my time. But the deeper self may whisper something quieter. Trust. Trust does not mean believing that everything will unfold according to your preferences. It may mean knowing that whatever unfolds, you can meet it without abandoning your inner connection. That is a much deeper form of trust. You stop trying to make life promise that you will never experience loss, disappointment, uncertainty, or change. Instead, you begin trusting that beneath every changing circumstance, there is something within you that can remain connected to love. And this is where intention becomes important. Intention is different from control. Control says, life must happen this way. Intention says, whatever happens, this is the quality of consciousness I choose to bring. Perhaps your intention is peace. Then you begin asking, what would peace do here? Not what would fear do, not what would pride do, not what would the need to prove yourself do. What would peace do? Sometimes peace speaks. Sometimes peace remains silent. Sometimes peace stays. Sometimes peace walks away. Sometimes peace forgives. Sometimes peace creates a boundary. Inner peace is not weakness. It is not agreeing with everyone. It is not avoiding difficult conversations. It is the ability to remain connected to your deepest values even when circumstances invite you back into old patterns. You may encounter someone who knows exactly how to trigger an old wound. Perhaps one sentence from them can return you to a younger version of yourself. Suddenly you want to defend everything you have become. You want to explain your choices. You want them to finally see you differently. In that moment, you can notice the familiar pull. Then breathe and ask, do I need to become who I used to be simply because they still see me that way? You may discover that you do not. Their image of you can remain unchanged while your relationship with yourself becomes entirely new. There is freedom in that. You do not need to update yourself in everyone's mind. Some people will remember an old version of you. Some will misunderstand your silence. Some will interpret your boundaries as rejection. Some may prefer the version of you who never said no. You can love them without returning to that version of yourself. This is what alignment can begin to feel like. It is not dramatic. It is the quiet experience of no longer betraying what you know within. And the more you live from this place, the less interested you become in proving anything. You begin to understand that love itself does not prove. The sun does not prove that it is light. A flower does not prove that it is beautiful. The ocean does not argue for its depth. They express what they are. Perhaps your life can become an expression rather than an argument. Instead of asking, how do I show people that I am loving? You love. Instead of asking, how do I prove that I have changed? You live differently. Instead of asking, how do I demonstrate my worth? You stop participating in situations that require you to deny it. Instead of announcing that you are at peace, you become peaceful. The energy of proving begins to disappear because your life no longer needs an audience. This may be especially meaningful as you grow older. There comes a time when you begin seeing how quickly seasons pass. Faces change. Bodies change. People who once seemed permanent become memories. Things that caused sleepless nights years ago may now seem strangely small. Aging can bring an invitation to ask a different question. Not have I impressed enough people, but have I been present for my own life? Have you watched the morning light without immediately reaching for yesterday's worries? Have you told people you loved them while they were still here to hear it? Have you forgiven yourself enough to enjoy the person you have become? Have you allowed ordinary moments to be sacred? Because perhaps purpose is not always something enormous waiting somewhere in the distance. Purpose may be the consciousness you bring to this moment, the way you listen, the way you forgive, the way you speak to yourself when no one else can hear, the way you meet another person's fear without adding your own, the way you sit beside someone who is suffering and do not try to fix them, the way you notice the sky, the way you say thank you, the way you return to love. There may be more spirituality in these quiet moments than in all of the grand identities the ego could ever construct, and gratitude helps you see them. Gratitude is not pretending that everything in life is pleasant. It is the willingness to notice what remains beautiful even while something hurts. You may be grieving and still feel grateful for the love that made grief possible. You may be uncertain and still feel grateful for this breath. You may be healing and still feel grateful that awareness has allowed you to see what needs healing. Gratitude gently moves attention from what is missing toward what is present. And where attention goes, your experience begins to change. You may wake in the morning and immediately remember everything unresolved in your life. Before your feet touch the floor, the mind has already opened yesterday's files. The unfinished conversation, the uncertainty, the fear, the person you miss, the thing you wish were different. What if, before entering all of that, you gave yourself one quiet moment, one breath, one awareness? I am here. Not everything is perfect. Simply, I am here. Feel the breath enter, feel it leave. Notice that life is happening without your effort. Your heart is beating. The morning has arrived. Something larger than your conscious mind is carrying thousands of processes within your body without asking you to control them. Perhaps you can allow that realization to remind you that you are participating in a mystery much larger than your plans. This is one way of reconnecting with the source, not necessarily through complicated ideas, but through presence, through noticing, through becoming available to the sacredness hidden inside ordinary life. And as that connection deepens, love begins changing too. You stop thinking of love only as something another person gives you. Love becomes a way of being. You can bring love to your own fear. You can bring love to your uncertainty. You can bring love to the part of yourself that still wants approval. When that frightened voice says, "Please tell me I am enough," you do not have to silence it. You can meet it gently. I hear you. I know you are afraid. You do not have to prove anything right now. Imagine how different your inner life becomes when you stop treating your wounded parts as enemies. The part of you that overthinks may simply be trying to protect you. The part that seeks approval may remember what rejection felt like. The part that wants control may be terrified of being surprised by pain again. These parts do not necessarily need punishment. They need awareness and love. When a frightened child wakes from a nightmare, you do not lecture the child about the unreality of the dream. You offer presence. You remind them that they are safe in this moment. Perhaps you can begin offering yourself the same tenderness. This is how self-trust becomes remembrance rather than achievement. You do not build trust by forcing yourself never to feel afraid again. You remember that even when fear appears, there is something deeper within you capable of holding it. You do not prove that you are healed by never being triggered. You discover healing in the way you meet the trigger when it comes. You do not prove that you have found peace by creating a life without difficulty. You recognize peace as the place within you that difficulty cannot permanently take away. And then, almost naturally, your relationship with life begins to soften. You stop gripping everything so tightly. You allow people to be who they are. You allow yourself to be unfinished. You allow tomorrow to remain unknown. You allow the past to stay where it belongs. This is surrender, not giving up on life, giving up the struggle against life. There is a great difference. Surrender says, I will participate fully, but I will stop demanding that the universe follow my script. And sometimes when you release the script, you finally notice the life that has been happening around you all along. The person sitting beside you, the wind moving through the trees, the sound of someone you love laughing, the warmth of a cup held between your hands, the silence before sleep. These things may not look like proof of a successful life to the ego, but to the deeper self, they can feel like evidence that life was never asking to be conquered. It was asking to be experienced, and perhaps that is the return. You return from comparison to presence, from resentment to forgiveness, from control to trust, from fear to love, from proving to being. You begin realizing that your true self was never standing at the end of the road waiting for you to become worthy enough to meet it. It was walking with you the entire time. Through every mistake, through every loss, through every relationship, through every lonely night when you thought you had lost your way, the source within you did not disappear when you doubted yourself. Love did not abandon you when you forgot how to love yourself. The light did not leave because clouds appeared. You simply forgot where to look, and now you are remembering. Perhaps this is the moment when the title of this journey begins to reveal its deepest meaning. Prove yourself to yourself no longer means becoming impressive enough to silence your doubts. It means becoming present enough to see that the one who was demanding proof was never the whole of you. Your deepest self does not ask for credentials. It does not compare your timeline. It does not count your failures. It does not demand that you become someone else before offering you peace. It simply invites you home. And when you begin living from that awareness, a final question appears. How do you carry this remembrance into ordinary life? How do you remain connected when the phone rings, when someone disappoints you, when uncertainty returns, when the old voice begins comparing again? Perhaps the answer is not to hold tightly to some perfect spiritual state. Perhaps it is to create small openings throughout your day where you can remember. A breath, a moment of silence, an act of forgiveness, a simple thank you, a willingness to release what cannot be controlled. Because inner freedom may not arrive in one extraordinary moment. It may be created through countless ordinary moments in which you gently choose to return. Again, and again, and again, until returning home no longer feels like something you are trying to do. It begins to feel like the way you live. And perhaps this is where the journey becomes beautifully simple. Not because life suddenly becomes easy, and not because you will never again experience fear, uncertainty, disappointment, or self-doubt. It becomes simple because you begin to understand where to return when those things appear. You return to yourself, not the self that needs to win every argument, not the self that needs everyone to understand, not the self that measures its worth against someone else's life. You return to the quiet awareness beneath all of that. The presence that can notice fear without becoming fear. The presence that can experience uncertainty without demanding an immediate answer. The presence that remembers that peace was never something the outside world could permanently give or take away. And you can practice this remembrance in very ordinary moments. Perhaps tomorrow morning, before you reach for your phone or begin remembering everything that needs your attention, you simply become still for a moment. Feel your breath. Notice the silence before the day becomes noisy. You do not have to ask for anything. You do not have to solve anything. You can simply acknowledge, I am here. That may be enough. Throughout the day, you might notice the old patterns returning. Someone may say something that makes you feel misunderstood. You may see another person's life and begin comparing. An uncertain situation may tempt you to imagine every possible outcome. When this happens, you do not need to criticize yourself for losing your peace. Simply notice. Awareness itself is already a return. You might quietly ask, what am I believing right now? Perhaps you are believing that you need this person's approval. Perhaps you are believing that uncertainty means something is wrong. Perhaps you are believing that someone else's progress diminishes your own path. Then breathe and remember that a thought can visit you without becoming your home. This is one of the gentlest forms of freedom. You do not have to control every thought. You simply stop allowing every thought to define you. And when resentment appears, you can practice forgiveness in the same quiet way. You do not have to force yourself into feelings you do not genuinely have. You can begin with willingness. I am willing to release this. Perhaps today you can release only a little. That little matters. Forgiveness may happen slowly, like ice melting beneath the warmth of the sun. You do not stand over the ice demanding that it disappear. You provide warmth and allow transformation to happen in its own time. Offer yourself that warmth too. There will be moments when you remember something you regret. When that happens, notice how you speak to yourself. Would you speak those same words to someone you deeply loved? If not, perhaps there is another language available. I was learning. I did not know then what I know now. I can choose differently now. These words do not deny responsibility. They simply allow responsibility to exist beside compassion. And compassion creates room for change. You can also allow gratitude to become a quiet part of your day. Not as a ritual you perform perfectly, but as a way of noticing. Notice one thing that did not have to happen but did. Someone smiled at you. Your body carried you through another day. Rain touched the earth. You heard a familiar voice. You had another opportunity to begin again. Gratitude reminds you that life is not only made of the things you are waiting for, life is also made of what is already here. And perhaps one of the deepest practices is learning to trust what you cannot yet understand. There will always be unanswered questions. You may not know where a relationship is going. You may not know what the next season of your life will bring. You may not understand why a certain door closed or why something you loved had to change. You can spend enormous energy demanding answers from tomorrow, or you can return to this breath. Trust does not require you to know what is coming. Trust simply asks whether you can remain connected to yourself while you do not know. There is tremendous peace in allowing the future to arrive at its own pace. A flower does not pull at its petals to make itself bloom sooner. A river does not demand to see the ocean before continuing forward. And perhaps you do not need to see the entire path before taking your next peaceful step. Let your intention be simple. When fear appears, return to love. When judgment appears, return to awareness. When resentment appears, return to forgiveness. When control appears, return to trust. When the need to prove yourself appears, return to the quiet remembrance that your worth was never being judged by the source from which you came. And if you forget, return again. There is no failure in forgetting. The return itself is the practice. You may forget 100 times in one day. You may become impatient. You may compare yourself. You may react from an old wound. Then suddenly you notice. That moment of noticing is not evidence that you have failed spiritually. It is awareness waking up again. Welcome it. Over time, something subtle may begin changing. You may discover that situations that once controlled your inner world no longer have the same power. You may hear criticism without carrying it for days. You may watch someone walk away without concluding that your worth walked away with them. You may enter uncertainty without immediately assuming that something terrible is coming. And one day, you may realize that you have stopped trying to prove yourself. Not because you finally proved enough, because the question itself no longer makes sense. You look at your life differently. You see the mistakes, but you also see what they taught you. You see the losses, but you also see the love that existed within them. You see the years you spent doubting yourself, but instead of regretting those years, perhaps you feel tenderness for the person who was simply trying to find their way home. And then gratitude arrives. Not gratitude because everything happened exactly as you wanted. Gratitude because somehow, through everything, you are here. Still capable of loving. Still capable of forgiving. Still capable of beginning again. Still capable of becoming quiet enough to hear the wisdom that was always within you. Perhaps this is what inner freedom feels like. It is not becoming untouchable. It is becoming less afraid of being touched by life. You allow yourself to love even though love contains vulnerability. You allow yourself to trust even though there are no guarantees. You allow yourself to change without apologizing for no longer being who you once were. And you allow others the freedom to walk their own paths. You no longer need everyone to agree with you before you can be peaceful. You no longer need yesterday to be different before you can appreciate today. You no longer need tomorrow to promise you anything before you can breathe deeply now. You begin living fully, quietly, presently. And perhaps someday you will look back and understand that the person you were trying so hard to become was never far away. You were simply covered by stories. Stories about what you should have achieved. Stories about who should have loved you. Stories about what should not have happened. Stories about why you were not enough. As those stories loosen, something timeless remains. Awareness, presence, love, the source within you. And from that place, you may finally understand the paradox at the heart of this entire journey. You began wanting to prove yourself to yourself, but the deepest freedom came when you realized there was nothing to prove. You were never required to earn your right to exist. You were never required to become perfect before deserving peace. You were never required to receive everyone's approval before trusting the quiet wisdom within you. You were being invited to remember. Remember the stillness beneath your thoughts. Remember the love beneath your fear. Remember the awareness beneath your identity. Remember that beneath everything you have been told about yourself, there is something within you that remains connected to the source of life itself. So when the world becomes loud again, return. When fear tells you that you are behind, return. When the past asks you to carry it one more day, gently set it down and return. Return to the breath. Return to gratitude. Return to forgiveness. Return to love. Return to the quiet place within you where nothing needs to be defended and nothing needs to be proven. And perhaps tonight, before you sleep, you can place one simple question into the silence. What am I finally ready to stop proving? You do not need to force an answer. Just listen. Maybe the answer will arrive as a thought. Maybe it will arrive as a feeling. Let the silence be enough. Because sometimes silence is where you remember what words made you forget. And if something in this journey reminded you of a truth you had quietly carried within yourself all along, you are welcome to share that reflection in the comments. Your words may become the reminder someone else needs today. And if you would like to continue exploring inner peace, forgiveness, awareness, and the journey back to your true self, you can subscribe and return whenever you need another quiet moment of remembrance. Until then, move gently through your life. You do not have to chase yourself. You do not have to repair yourself into worthiness. You do not have to prove yourself to the world, or even to the person looking back at you in the mirror. Just keep returning. Because beneath everything you thought you had to become, you are already carrying what you were searching for. And perhaps you always were.